I work these granny squares with mercerized cotton, 100% mercerized cotton. Specifically, I work with Yarn Art Begonia, which is a category 2, and a hook size 3.5 millimeters. But you don't have to work with cotton. You can work with acrylic and a corresponding size hook. There is a wide variety of projects you can make with these granny squares. You can make a table runner or placemat. If you use acrylic and combine white and pink or white and blue, those could be very beautiful baby blankets. The written pattern will be available in my Etsy and Ravelry shops, and the best way to support my channel is through purchasing a pattern from me. Thank you so much. I start with 6 chains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I join them into a ring with a slip stitch. Now I will be working into the ring. First I make 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the ring I work 2 double crochets finished together. 1, 2. Now I finish them together, and with these 2 chains, this is actually gonna count as 3 double crochets finished together, or a 3 double crochet cluster. Next, 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and into the ring I work a 3 double crochets finished together cluster. And I finish them together and I have another cluster. Next, 2 chains, 1, 2, and again into the ring a cluster. 1, 2, 3. Now I make 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and again into the ring I work a cluster, or 3 double crochets finished together. Okay, so let's look here again. After the first cluster I had 3 chains, then over here 2 chains, then over here again 3 chains. So it's gonna alternate 3 chains, 2 chains, 3 chains, 2 chains, and 3 chains are gonna be at the corners. These 3 chains here and here are gonna create corners of the granny square. So next, 2 chains, 1, 2, and a cluster. 1, 2, 3. Now 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and a cluster. 1, 2, 3. So now I have 3 corners so far. 1, 2, 3. So next, 2 chains and a cluster. 1, 2, 3. Then 3 chains. 1, 2, 3, and again a cluster. 1, 2, 3. So this was the last corner. So 1, 2, 3, 4 corners. Next I make 2 chains, 1, 2, and I'm going to join to the first cluster. I'm gonna insert the hook through all 3 stitches over here, and I join with a slip stitch. So this is the first round. I have 4 corners. On the corners there are 3 chains, and on the sides there are 2 chains, and there is a total of 8 clusters. To start the next round, I make a slip stitch into this chain 3 space of the corner. And now I'm going to work a beginning cluster again. So I make 2 chains, 1, 2, and then into this same corner space I work 2 double crochets finished together. I finish them together, and with these 2 chains, this actually counts as a 3 double crochet cluster. Next, 3 chains, and again into the same chain space over here, into the corner space, I work another cluster. So 1, 2, 3, and I finish them together. So I have a corner made. Next, 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next chain 2 space over here, I'm gonna work 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next chain 3 space of the corner, I work a cluster, 1, 2, 3, finish them together, then 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and another cluster. So 1, 2, 3, and I finish them together. So here I have 2 corners made so far. Next, 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next chain 2 space over here, 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. Again, 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next corner space, a cluster, 3 chains, and a cluster. So that's a cluster, now 3 chains, and another cluster. Now again, 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next chain 2 space, 3 double crochets. 1, 2, 3. 2 chains, and into the corner space, a cluster, 3 chains, and a cluster. Two chains, 1, 2, into the next chain 2 space, 3 double crochets, 1, 2, 3, then 2 chains, and I join with a slip stitch to the first cluster. I insert the hook through 3 loops, and this round is finished. Now each round is going to start in the same way. So first I make a slip stitch into the corner space, and then I make a beginning cluster, which is 2 chains and 2 double crochets finished together, then 3 chains and 1 more cluster. So this was the same thing as what I did in the previous round, and in the following rounds I will do the same thing. Next, 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next chain 2 space over here, I work 1 double crochet. Now I'm going to work a double crochet into each one of these 3 double crochets, and I'm going to insert the hook directly into double crochet, not just under 2 loops on the top, but over here. So this is basically like inserting the hook under 3 loops, and that way my stitches are gonna be neatly aligned one on top of the other instead of being shifted to the side. So I make a double crochet into each double crochet over here. Next, into the chain 2 space over here, I make 1 double crochet. So on the side I have a total of 5 double crochets now. 2 chains, 1, 2, and I work the corner space the same way as before. It's gonna be a cluster, 3 chains and a cluster. 3 chains and a cluster. And now this side I'm gonna work the same as over here. 2 chains and into the next chain 2 space, 1 double crochet, then a double crochet into each one of these 3 double crochets, inserting the hook directly into the double crochet. Into the next chain 2 space, 1 double crochet, then 2 chains and the corner the same way as before, a cluster, 3 chains and a cluster. And that's how I'm gonna continue working this round. These 2 sides are gonna be worked the same way as the previous sides, and at the end of the round I will join with a slip stitch into the top of the first cluster, just the same as I did in the previous round. I start the next round the same way as before. I work a cluster, 3 chains and a cluster. Next 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next chain 2 space I make a double crochet. And now I'm going to make a double crochet into each one of these 5 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and into the next chain 2 space a double crochet. So on this side I have a total of 7 double crochets, and then just as I did over here, 2 chains and the corner space, which is a cluster, 3 chains and a cluster. So that's a cluster, 3 chains and a cluster. And then this side is going to be worked the same way as this one. 2 chains and into the next chain 2 space a double crochet, and then a double crochet into each one of these 5 double crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and into the next chain 2 space a double crochet. Now 2 chains, 1, 2, and again the corner space, a cluster, three chains and a cluster. And then the other 2 sides are gonna be worked the same way. I start the next round as before. That's a cluster, 3 chains and a cluster. Next 2 chains, 1, 2, and into the next chain 2 space I make a double crochet. Next, 1 chain, I skip the next double crochet, and into the next one I work a double crochet. And again, 1 chain, I skip the next double crochet, and into the next one I work a double crochet. Again, 1 chain, skip 1 double crochet, and a double crochet into the next double crochet. 1 chain, skip the next double crochet, and a double crochet into the next chain 2 space. Then 2 chains, 1, 2, and the corner space as before. A cluster, 3 chains, and a cluster. And this side will be worked the same way. First 2 chains and a double crochet into the next chain 2 space. 1 chain, skip 1 double crochet, and a double crochet into the next double crochet. 1 chain, skip next double crochet, and a double crochet into the next double crochet, and so on. And over here, a double crochet into the chain 2 space. Then 2 chains, and in the corner space I work a cluster, 3 chains, and a cluster. And the other 2 sides I'm gonna work the same way. At the end of this round I joined with a slip stitch to the first cluster, the same way as before. And after this round you might feel that the sides are a bit too tight and the square is not flat, it's curling up. But don't worry, everything will be flat after the next round. So the next round, the last one, I start as before. So I work a cluster, 3 chains, and another cluster. Next, 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and into the next chain 2 space I make a cluster. Now again, 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and into the next chain space I work a cluster. Again, 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and into the next chain space I work a cluster. And so on. 3 chains and a cluster. Three chains and a cluster. Again, 3 chains and a cluster. So on this side, after the 2 clusters on the corner, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 clusters, and in between them there's 3 chains. And again, 3 chains, and into the corner space I work a cluster, 3 chains, and a cluster. And on this side again, I will be working clusters and chain 3 again. So 3 chains and a cluster. Into the chain space. That's where I work the clusters. The clusters are worked into the chain spaces. 3 chains and a cluster. Three chains and a cluster. And so on. And then at the end of the round, after the last 3 chains, I simply join with a slip stitch the way I did before. And now this square is completely flat, and you can work a whole bunch of them and create a project out of them. And if you want to join them in the last round, here is how to do it. So I'm gonna undo the last round and show you how to join the squares as you go into the last round. After I made the first cluster, I make 2 chains, not 3 but only 2 chains, and I drop the loop of the hook. I take my previous square and I'm going to pass this loop through the corresponding chain 3 space of the corner of the first square, like this. Then I make 1 chain and I finish this corner space, so I make a cluster. So these 2 squares are now connected at the corner. So next I work 2 chains. Instead of 3 chains, I only work 2. And again, I drop the loop of the hook and I pass it through the corresponding chain 3 space of the previous square, but I need to make sure to pass it on the right side. I almost made a mistake passing it on the wrong side. So both squares must be facing the right side up, because you don't want to connect your squares where one square is facing the right side up and the other one is facing the wrong side up. So once I did that, I make 1 chain and I go back to this second square and I make a cluster. So this is how they begin to be connected. Next, 2 chains, 1, 2, and again I drop off the loop and pass it through the first square, and then 1 chain and I make a cluster on the second square. Again, 2 chains, 1, 2, and pass it through 1 chain and back to the second square and make a cluster. So that's how they connect here in the last round. So 2 chains, pass through 1 chain and a cluster. Again, 2 chains, pass through 1 chain and a cluster. And so on. So here I finished crocheting this entire side, and that's how the granny squares are connected. And this is only one way to connect them. That's how you connect them in the last round. You can choose to finish them all individually and then connect them in a different way. There are many different ways to connect granny squares. It's really up to you.